Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. So, today we're taking a look at another arcade game, another Brawler, and another Technos game, which, well, it wasn't that long ago, I guess, that we did this thing, but the reason we're doing this is I was thinking the other day, once again, about some of the arcade games that I grew up with in my teenage years, all way too many years ago, and I thought about this one. So this is an interesting title that, well, spoilers, I'm going to lay this out here a little bit. It's actually not very good, but aside from the fact that I have to keep reminding myself that I got to talk about the good as well as the bad in historical context, at the same time, this game also has some really interesting ideas that were really antithetical to the idea of what made an arcade game at the time. And that's what I'm going to show you here. So, we're looking at the Combatribes. Street gangs, but fancy, weird name, because Japan. I gotta tell you, when we look at this, motorcycle nuclear warheads. Man, you know, what Japan must have thought about American gang culture in the 80s and what it was. To play a game like this, or a lot of the other games that involve brawling street gangs in a pseudo-realistic context, it really feels like so many of these Japanese game designers watched The Warriors one night and just thought that that was a documentary. Because the stuff in this is so crazy. Like, okay, this is just a motorcycle gang in, like, I guess it's supposed to be New York or some other generic urban downtown, but okay, they're called the motorcycle nuclear warheads, for one thing. And secondly, this stuff just gets even crazier. Like, I'm not gonna spoil this, but wait till we get to the second level and you see what's in there. I mean, it's just like, did you all just need to take the piss when you were designing these games, or did you really seriously think this is how gang violence worked in the 80s? Because, man, it really didn't. But anyway, I just find it amusing. So, as you're seeing here, this is a pretty generic-y brawler, right? This is what Technos did best. They did brawlers and brawler variants, often based in sports. And that's nothing wrong with that. Hey, I love me a good brawler, and you know, these are the guys who made Double Dragon. They made some good stuff. And they made some other games that I really like. They made Super Dodgeball, they did other stuff like that. But this one is just plain not very good because, well, it's just an arena fighter, number one. As you can see, we're in a single area here. It doesn't scroll very far. It's not multiple screens. It's just fight through a bunch of cannon fodder, red shirts, and kill a boss guy, which has a specific strategy. There's not even a lot of moves in this compared to some of the other Technos titles. There's a punch and a kick. You can run, you can't jump. The little bit of variety does come when you have enemies that are downed, which unfortunately I can't show you with the boss here, but as you did see earlier, you can take two guys and slam their heads together. There's actually a move that allows you to pick up a guy and spin him around like a cartwheel, well, not like a cartwheel, but like a helicopter, and basically whip guys down with it. And there's even, okay, so speaking of what I was saying about interpretation of gang culture, demon clowns that were fighting in, like, Disneyland while a crazy cat puppet show happens behind us. This is gang warfare, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, and there's the spin attack. So, yeah. So, as you can see, there's really not much to this. It's a pretty generic brawler. It was kind of neat in that, depending on the arcade cabinet that you were in, you could have up to, actually, 3 players. This is the 2-player version, but there was a 3-player cabinet available, which was kind of cool, that I liked, and it was co-op based. The objective was, as a team, to get through all the levels and bosses. So that was alright, but it lacks some very big fundamentals. So as you saw in the last level, in some areas there are certain environmental hazards you can pick up, like those motorbikes, for example. But one of the things that's great about Brawlers, and was particularly good about some of the older Technos games, was that a lot of enemies had their own weapons, and when you knocked them over, they would usually drop said weapon, which then allowed you to pick it up and use it against them, whether it was a bat or a knife or other things like that. All the enemies in this have weapons, as you can see. The bikers had chains. These guys have, like, weird canes and juggling implements and everything else. But you can't pick any of them up. You knock the enemies down and their weapon just disappears. And those clowns make an oddly Nazi salute-like attack, which was probably not intentional. I just noticed that. That's a little... And so it's really, really basic. The attack variety is super, 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 super generic. And it's a weird thing, too, right? Because this game, like... It doesn't skimp out on all the production values. Like, this game actually looks pretty good. The sprites are really, really nice. The frame rate, while not a solid 60, is fairly, it's fairly consistent. The Double Dragon was infamous for how bad it had slowdown, so were a lot of their other home console games. But this looks really good. The sound effects are good. There's a lot of speech in it, as there often is. I totally wasted that thing. Oh, jeez. Yeah, this guy's kind of a pain. The speech samples are actually pretty good. They're reasonably solid for a title from 1990. And the brawling, despite its rather limited moveset, does still feel appealing in a lot of ways. Like, it's got that really good visceral feel, you know, the punches feel that they have real weight and impact outside of the sound. Like, it really does feel like you are kind of beating the snot out of these guys, which is cool. Now the boss variety gets a little more interesting because we're chasing this dude up a set of stairs, which is really just an excuse to give us different waves of enemies, but whatever. So far I've given this game a couple of compliments, but mostly I'm kind of like, it's really nothing special. So why are we talking about it today? Well, what is really interesting about this game, and I really don't know what the motivation behind it was. I don't know if it was just an experiment or if, you know, one of the designers at Technos decided to have a little bit of an auteur moment, but there's no score in this game. Like, none whatsoever. There's no score you can achieve. There is no high score chart. There is no leaderboard. There is no top score. There is nothing. It's the objective of this game is purely to get through it. It's not to accumulate a high score with which to best competitors, right? And that's what's really weird. Technos Land. That's a lousy name for a theme park, dudes. But I guess it doesn't infringe on anybody's trademarks, though, does it? So now that I've said there's no score in this game, so what the heck is that number in the upper left? Well, that number is my life, and you may have deduced that by watching thus far, but that number is actually your life, and that ticks down as you take damage. You run that out, and you gotta feed another quarter into it. And what's interesting about it, so every player, obviously, if you're in a multiplayer session, gets their own life bar. And what's interesting about this is I've only been putting one coin into this at a time, obviously, as you can see, but watch this. And as you can see, by feeding multiple coins into the game, you actually just boost your life. So in a really weird way, like, this almost feels like a like a real weird early predecessor to some of the, like, microtransaction games. Slash skate screamers. Say that 3 times fast. And we're gonna throw the rink-dat pinball table at you because, yeah, it's great. But look at this level, you know, like, look at the colors in the background, the moving lights, stuff like that. Like, it's pretty neat, right? It looks cool. Like, the art in this game is actually really, really nice. Technos were actually really, really skilled at making exceptional 2D sprites. But anyway, so yeah, that was one of the interesting things. It almost feels like a weird implementation of some of the mechanics you might see in, like, a modern free-to-play game, where it's like, hey, you don't need to play it once at a time, or 1 credit at a time. If you want to pre-feed, like, you know, $5 worth of quarters into this thing, you can make yourself basically a god in terms of your life. So you can essentially, you could credit feed your way to beating the game on 1 life without ever seeing a continue prompt if you want to feed enough money into it, i.e. Like, look at that life! I am basically Kratos, the god of war, right now. And I don't know, I just find that so strange. And that's the only numeric value, and you're not scored on that at all. Like, you're not, like, you don't have any type of incentive to beat the game with a higher amount of life. There's no leaderboard saying, hey, look, this dude beat the game with 1,000 life, because obviously that would be completely skewed and stupid, because obviously you could just credit feed your way to an automatic high score, which makes no sense. But, and the thing is, that is completely antithetical to the common design of an arcade, because an arcade game is designed to, well, suck money from your wallet, and the way they did that is by not only making the games very, very difficult, but also by giving you an incentive to replay, which was a good scoring system and a high score table, so that you could say, hey, you know, I played this a whole bunch and I got better at it, and thus I beat your top score, so hey, you know, and it was for bragging rights. But this game literally doesn't do that. And as long as you can, if you're, the only bragging rights in this really come from how far into the game you get, which is very much a hallmark of something you'd see on a home console. And it obviously makes more sense in that context. And this game did come out on home systems. There was a really lamely censored Super Nintendo version that's available that you actually can get on the Wii Virtual Console if you want. But it's creepy. This is a really weird floor. But it almost, but this is not how you design an arcade game. And really, if I recall, this game at the fire button that we had, the arcade in my neighborhood, was that, despite the fact that it was there a long time, was actually not super popular, simply because there was no real competitive element to it. Because you could play it through once with your friends if you wanted, and then after that you were like, well, we beat it, there's no reason to go back to this because there's no high score table. We actually had a group of regulars at the fire button who tried to be fairly competitive on the high score score attack, and you don't get that with this. And I just think that's really, really interesting, and frankly pretty ballsy, because Technos... Well, Technos wasn't around super long, and to be honest with you, wow, that hair, man. Whew. And outside of a couple of big successes, Technos didn't last very long, and actually didn't do all that well as a company. Most of their games were not super big hits, and for them to make a move like this was actually kind of ballsy. I mean, I don't know if it was just trying to defy convention, or if it was just sheer arrogance on their part. It's really hard to say, because the problem is I really can't fathom what the objective was in this, other than some auteur designer being, well, auteurish, if you will. I don't really know what the point is. I think, other than saying we want to give people a cohesive linear experience, and we want them to experience the whole thing rather than just hit the high score and move on, I can't see what your motivation would be for this. And I certainly can't see, if I was an arcade operator, I certainly can't see the ultimate value in this either, to me, because I'd be like, well, there's very little replay incentive with this game. Who's going to want to play this more than once, if they beat it at all? Because most people don't beat arcade games. But it was very, and that's the thing, I like stuff that stands out. Whether it's good or bad, I like things in retro titles that defy conventions, because when you were dealing with arcade games, there were certain things that you could pretty much always count on. For what the hell just happened? Oh, time over. Ugh. That's weak sauce. I don't think I've ever gotten a time over in this game, and I didn't realize that wouldn't completely take you out regardless of how much credit-fed life you had. That's pretty damn scummy, if you ask me. Wow, dudes. That's really bad. Holy crap. I'd be really pissed if I was playing this in an arcade back in the day and that happened. Like, seriously, how does a street gang get their own stadium? Like, can someone explain that to me? Like, is this really how you thought? Anyway. So, yeah. For that reason alone, I think this is a pretty interesting thing. And you know what? It's still satisfying as a brawler. Technos has their trademark brawling system style in here on full display, and it's definitely still it still has that visceral feeling of, hey, I am beating the snot out of people, and it feels really, really good. And I'll give him credit for that at least, but beyond that, like I said, it looks good. The art is really good. The music, Technos were never specialists at music. The music is generic but passable. The sound effects are really good and solid. But there's way better brawlers out there, you know. This is not Final Fight. This is not Double Dragon. This is not River City Ransom. This is not even like the Ninja Turtles or the Simpsons game. It's just, it's really, really generic, and it's more fun in co-op. I do remember playing this in co-op. It is more fun that way, but again, it's fun once. And then after that, you're kind of like, well, what else are we going to do about it? And, oh man, Yes played here? And so did Black Flag, wow. And, yeah. I don't know, I just think it's a rather interesting little piece of arcade hit. That's racist. Wow, we're fighting an Indian mascot guy. Oh, God. Yeah, like I said, what they must have thought gangs were like in the United States. Oof. So, anywho, yeah, it is... There are way better brawlers out there, but from a purely historical design perspective, I think it's neat because it broke ground in different ways that, frankly, I don't think worked all that well, but... I don't think removing the scoring system from an arcade game is the smartest thing in the world. I think that's one system you maybe don't want to screw with that much. But it works. It works in some ways, and it's just interesting. And I applaud, you know, anyone who takes bold design risks, especially when it's a company like Technos, who frankly did not have a lot of hits and kind of burned out really, really quick. They were never really able to execute the success of Double Dragon a second time, and they kind of flamed out fairly early in their life. But they tried to do something different, and I always think that's admirable in its own way, even if it doesn't always turn out. And well, this didn't necessarily, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's cool, and it is pretty if nothing else. But yeah, that is the Combatribes, published and developed by Technos Japan Corporation in 1990. This is the arcade version. It is available for the Super Nintendo, and I might be on some other platforms too. The Super Nintendo version is on the Wii Virtual Console, but if you can, this is the way to play it. The Super Nintendo version was heavily censored and just a frankly not as good game. But you know, this is something fun to play. If you're into brawlers, this is something to play with friends once, but beyond that, you can do better. And I think talking about the design is cool, but beyond that, honestly, it's nothing special. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you next time.